Okay, so the first thing that you want to do is make sure that you are in your OneNote and you are in the April written text folder so that you have the tasks assigned to you. So what we're looking at today is setting, and that comes down to two aspects. So when we talk about settings, there are two ways to define settings. And when it comes to a question on setting, you can use either of these definitions or both, depending on what you want to work with and how the question's phrased. So when it comes to setting, you have a space and a place. So space refers to a context. So space means kind of when something's taking place. So that might mean a historical context, a social context, a political context or existence. So the America during the Civil Rights Movement is a space because that adds something to just saying America. So the social movement that takes place, the political movement that takes place makes that more significant. The other type of setting that you can have is a place. So that is kind of your more traditional definition of setting, one that you'd think of straight away. So that's a physical place where something takes place. So it could be a barn, it could be a coffee shop, it could be a classroom. So if you think about where you are right now in the world, you are in possibly a physical place like a bedroom or a living room, or it could be we're at school, a classroom. And the space that we're in is 2020 during a pandemic. So that adds a different kind of context to it and allows you to think about different things. They do kind of weave together. So obviously a physical place can be influenced by the space that surrounds it. So they do kind of mingle together a little bit as well. But it's important to think of them in two ways. So have a think about, for a moment, our text. There will come soft rains, and think about what the space of our text is, when it takes place, what's going on, and then have a think of some of the places that appear in our text. You will need to copy down the definition of space and place, so make sure you take a moment to pause and get that down, and then we'll wriggle on to looking at space in more detail. So the space in our text. The space in our text is a dystopian future setting. That is the space that it takes place in. So the year that it is set is 2026. We know this pretty early on in the text. At the time of writing, that would be just over 70 years into the future at the time of publication. And considering that this probably started a little bit earlier than that, you're looking at probably 75 to 77 years in the future from when Ray Bradbury wrote it. So if you think about it as in 77 years, it's within someone's lifetime. So it's distant, but not too distant. And that's meant to be, when you're looking at dystopian text, the most alarming time, because then there's a sense of realism to it. If it's set 200 years away, someone that's living now isn't going to care. But if it's set 70 years away, then someone that is existing now is thinking of their grandchildren or their children, and how that's going to impact them. So the not too distant future is the scariest way to set a dystopian future. It's going to make people more alarmed or aware, as opposed to sitting at 200 years, 300 years, 500 years in the future. So when we look at that, we need to think about the eyes of the author who's looking at that dystopian setting. So that's Ray Bradbury. So he obviously wrote this story post-World War II, and the poem is post-World War I. So post-World War II, we're thinking of the nuclear warfare, the atomic bomb, Hiroshima, all those sort of things. And that's influencing the dystopian setting that he's creating. Now, we also have to consider how we're placed as an audience reading it now, and thinking, obviously, 6 years' time, that doesn't look super likely. But if we were to look 70 years or 50 years or even 30 years into our future and take what the worst thing that's going on right now in our lives, and you can go with illness and coronavirus, or you can be thinking of other aspects that are wrong with society. So racism-based, homophobia-based, technology-based, social media-based, use of phone-based, anything like that, and imagine that in 50 to 70 years, what would the worst case scenario look like? So that's what you've got to remember, that that's how Ray Bradbury's writing it, and that's how he wants us to consume it, whether we were reading it at the time post-World War II, or whether we're reading it now with a different lens on it, but also an appreciation that dystopian settings are forever going to be present in literature. So the importance of space. Obviously, there are the two sides of setting, but it's important to think about the space because it influences our understanding of the text. So it allows us to reflect on human nature at the time of writing, so those 1950s, but also at the time of reading, and whether there's a difference between humans. Have humans changed that much? Or are we actually the same selfish people that we were 70 years ago? I reckon, spoiler alert, we're probably the same, if not worse. This setting allows us to reflect on, once again, the selfishness of man. The setting allows us to reflect on technological development and how there can be negative aspects to it. And this space allows us to see how the impact of humans can lead to loneliness and a sense of despair. So that impacts the tone. So the setting obviously creates the action. So the space that it takes place in is really important for the action of the text. But it shows us human nature, allows us to reflect on the themes. So the space is really important when we consider those things as well. So take a pause, jot down some summary notes of the slide, and then we will move on to the next bit. Okay, so the dystopian future setting or space, how and when do we see it? So these are 4 ways that I think we see it. If you've got any more, you can not only copy these ones down, but write down some other ones of your own. These are just my ones to get you started. So here's how I see the dystopian future as a how and when in our text. So we see dystopian future setting through the technological development. So anything that is sort of beyond perhaps what we have, or even beyond what they had in 1950. So the cooking of the breakfast, the cleaning of the way, the mice cleaning, the cigar being lit, the bridge tables coming down, all this stuff that ultimately the family does not exist for. So that's due to technological developments ruining mankind. But even just those simple technological developments, considering the 1950s writing of it, even now, some of those are still a little unbelievable and not necessarily something that would happen, but they definitely wouldn't have been in existence in the 1950s. So that helps to create this future setting. And then the fact that they're doing it for no one creates the dystopian side of that. So there's a future setting and there's that dystopian element to the future setting. The description of the family, I don't know the exact quote off the top of my head, but the fact that there's 5 figures and all you can see is their shadows because they've obviously been obliterated by some nuclear bomb. The description of the rubble. So that's early on in the text that it stood as the only house on the street surrounded by rubble. That suggests that there is something dystopian and eerie to it. The technology living on at the end, there's a repetition of a voice. Even when everything has gone to pieces, there's still an alarm that goes off and there's still something that reads. So just this kind of eeriness that technology will outlive us, and that's in the last sentence of the text. So those are the ways that I see dystopian future settings existing. So the technological developments, and then as a sort of sub aspect of that, the fact that they exist without humans, the description of the family, the description of the rubble, and the technology living on at the end. So copy those down, and then if you've got any other examples that you think reflects the dystopian future, you can put those down. Perhaps the house cleaning up after the dead dog and incinerating him, or maybe talking about the kids' room, like lots of detail, this kind of idea of like the future being children, and then the fact that children are not there at all. That's kind of eerie. That could work. So yeah, make a note of those, and then we'll move on to the next one. Okay, so this is kind of a repetition of the previous one, but this sort of just summarizes them a little bit more. So why have this setting? Why have this dystopian future setting, the space that surrounds the action of the text? So it makes us think about how we're acting now and also then with regards to our nature and our needs as people, or human nature, or human mankind. It makes us think about our constant technological developments. It shows us the impact of human nature. So if you think about the fact that dystopian settings are meant to be a worst case scenario, this one's meant to show us what the worst is that we can be if we follow our nature rather than going against it, or we follow the worst parts of our nature rather than going against it. It provokes a sense of fear and urgency in a reader. So authors have different purposes. They're to make us think and to make us feel, is what they most things come down to. But we think about how terrible it is of human nature. But thinking is not enough. If we've got feeling, then we tend to have action. So there is meant to be a sense of urgency or a sense of fear. And that's what I said before comes down to that idea of being the not too distant future. And obviously, that is to reflect the insecurities of the time. And then as a reader, that should make you consider the insecurities of our time. And that's what I touched on before as well. So a little bit of repetition from the slide 2 slides back, but this one kind of summarizes it a little bit more. So jot those down. And if you have any additional ones, obviously add those to it. Why do you think we have this setting explored in the text? And now for physical settings. So I've done most of the notes for the space setting, but I want you to think about the place setting. A little bit easier, a little bit more concrete, easier to work with by and large. So these are the 3, one of them kind of covers a lot of them, physical settings in the text. So the house itself is a physical setting. Descriptions of the house, things that the house does. It's a setting. Yeah, that's a physical setting where things take place. The rooms within the house are all kind of unique as well. So the physical settings of the rooms. So you've got the kitchen, you've got like the living space, you've got the kids' bedroom, which takes on a huge amount of description. So yeah, that's a physical space. That's kind of a couple of physical spaces. And then the nature around the house. Okay, so if you're talking about the house as a physical setting, you want to talk about the events that take place within that setting. So the dog coming in, the breakfast being made, the house doing things is kind of a part of the setting because the house is alive, so it's a character, but also a setting. But if you're talking about it in terms of trying to talk about that setting, you want to focus on events that happen within that setting. Okay, so don't get caught up in the house doing things as a setting, because that's an action. What you want to focus on is the house being a setting, and then within that, things that happen in the house, if that makes sense. So don't get too caught up on what the house does, but focus more on what happens in the house, the events within the house as a setting. Otherwise you'll blur your lines and it will get a bit hard. So what I want you to do is to copy down those 3 settings. Then for each setting, describe what that setting is like. That should take you a sentence or 2. If you go with rooms within the house, you might want to break that down into the different rooms because they are different settings and different things happen in them and they are significant for different reasons. So I've just mentioned before what those different rooms are within the house, so just skip back and find that. Then go back and find a quote from that physical setting to build your notes for. The more detailed these are, the easier they are, and the easier life will be when you go to write an essay and you can just come back to one page that you know has notes on it. If you go back to your visual quotes grid, you might find some helpful ones there. And lastly, task 3, when you've done that, why could each of these settings be important or significant? What could we learn from them? So what could they offer us? So I've said before, focus on events that happen within the setting. What does it help us think about? Why have they got that setting? Why is it important that it happens in that room? Why is it important that it happens in that house? What does that help us think about? That sort of thing. So give that a go. You might find it tricky. That will probably take you, if you do it properly, 10 to 15 minutes, more like 15 minutes if you do it properly. So do it properly. And then come back and look at how you piece this all together for an essay. So what I've done is a slightly difficult essay question just to challenge your thoughts and expose you to some different essay types. So this is the question here in yellow and green. Describe at least one significant setting in the text. Explain how the setting was used for a particular purpose. Brackets S. So that obviously means more than one purpose is allowable and more than one setting is allowable. So if you wanted to make an easier essay topic, you would go with the dystopian future as a setting, and then you can talk about lots of different things within that. You might find it harder to talk about the house as a setting. Wouldn't be as hard. What you'd probably find more difficult is if you had a question that said describe a significant setting and you focused on the kid's bedroom, because that's only one setting and that might be hard to get 3 paragraphs out of. So it's important to read the questions carefully and work from there. So going with the dystopian future setting for this sort of modelled paragraph and essay and working with that, just so you can see how it works. Obviously, when it comes to essay writing, you can write on themes, you might be able to write on character, you can write on events really easily, but it's good to expose you to setting because it is still workable within our text as well. So the dystopian future setting, what I've done is plan paragraph 1 and 2. I've given you evidence in terms of events, but I haven't given you the quotes because I'm too lazy. And then what I want you to do is plan paragraph 3. So think of 2 events for paragraph 3. So paragraph 1 would focus on the benefits of the future setting shown through the breakfast, and then the piece of evidence 2 is when the breakfast is scraped away and how there's a sense of loneliness. So I'm looking there at the fact that the dystopian future shows that there's some promise to the technology, but ultimately the development led to the doom of people and now no one can use it. So it sort of links together quite well. Paragraph 2, I would focus on the dystopian future setting as shown through the rubble, and how it shows kind of the doom in this setting, and then the outlines of the humans, which is a couple of lines later, just to look at how there's a lack of life and just to kind of paint that picture that the dystopian setting there is being used for the purpose of kind of making the reader reflect on what we're doing wrong in human nature and what we've prioritized. So if you could think of the dystopian future setting, I want you to think of another event or events in the text that help to show that setting, and have a think about what purpose they exist for. What do they help to show? So if the breakfast event in the dystopian future shows the doom of technological development, and the descriptions outside the house in the dystopian future setting help to show a sense of doom and lack of life, what's another event or events that you can think of in the text that help to show the setting, and then think what do they help to show as a purpose. So it's slightly trickier, but if you have a look at what I've done and you go back to your notes, hopefully that one will be relatively easy to do. Now, I'm assuming you've gone through and you've done that 5-minute, 10-minute task. If you've done that, you should now know about space, place, examples in the text, and you can plan your paragraph. You just need to write an introduction. So all you need for the introduction is the text details, which you should have all of in the text itself, in any of your notes if you need them. The keywords from the question, if you don't know them, you're silly, but the keywords are significant setting and particular purpose or purpose. And your main points. And your main points are these ones. This one here is your main point, main point 2, main point 3, you've got yourself. So I just want you to write an introduction. An introduction, in theory, should take no more than 10 minutes and really should be only taking you 5 minutes. They're not the thing that determines your grade. Okay, so you've got to have them, but you're not going to get better grades from having a beautiful introduction. It's going to come from your ideas more than anything. So have a go writing that. Then I'm going to read you through a exemplar paragraph, and if you're feeling young, wild and free, you can write your own paragraph too. So this is the big kahuna. So I've made it take up most of the page. It is quite long, and I know that pink can be slightly hard to read, but hopefully the pink in your OneNote is easier to read because it's a different pink. So here is paragraph 1. Yellow is description stuff and content. So topic, sentence, description, context, anything that I thought was relevant like that. Green is evidence. Grey is analysis. Blue is explanations or links to that part of the question. And the pink down the bottom is direct writer's purpose. Now this one is kind of got writer's purpose inherently included because it was part of the question, a particular purpose. So quite a lot of purpose going on. I'll read it to you. Have a read, have a listen. If you don't want to listen to my voice, you can just end the video now. Otherwise, just have a listen to it and follow along and have a read through it. The significant dystopian future setting is explored through descriptions of the house and its actions at the beginning of the text. The author has used the setting here to explore the sense of darkness in the world without humans, so that's the particular purpose. Oops. During this event, we see the house prepare food for the family. Here, the house's kitchen ejected from its warm interior 8 pieces of perfectly brown toast, 8 eggs, sunny side up, 16 slices of bacon, 2 coffees, and 2 cool glasses of milk. This quote shows the house cares deeply for the humans it serves, perfectly brown toast with a cool glass of milk, showing a level of care from the house. This reflects the dystopian future setting, as here we can see everything a human could desire, a house taking over all the boring things like cooking. But as the author continues, we can see the downside of these technological developments, as without humans to serve, the tone goes from pleasant to bleak. The eggs were shriveled and the toast was like stone. An aluminium wedge scraped them down a metal throat, which digested and flushed them away. This shows that in this dystopian future, things are not as perfect as they look on first glance. Harsh words like shriveled, metal throat, digested and flushed show that this world is not perfect and is in fact eerie and a bit scary without humans there. Here the author uses this setting to reveal his purpose of the darkness in these future worlds. He wants to show us what things could be like if we continue to value technological development and advancement over anything else. Whilst initially we may view it as wonderful, we quickly realize that wonder is worth nothing if we are not there to enjoy it, as we may be creating our own downfall. The writer wants us to pause for reflection and consider the value of development and how it can lead to our own demise. This is apparent when we look at our love of social media. We jumped at the opportunity We jump at the opportunity to have such things, but now they rule our lives as we are so glued to the screens and so much less social. Apologies for the terrible reading of that, but hopefully you can see all aspects of the question are addressed there. There's some analysis of language and how that's built the reader's understanding of it. The first quote is kind of a little bit woven in. The second one isn't so much, but I haven't used the sentence start of this quote shows, so I'm just trying to include a little bit more sophistication in the writing style. If you look at the amount, if you consider that grey, blue, and pink are all parts of explanation in theory, and then the yellow and the green there is kind of a little bit more descriptive stuff. You've got a really good balance, a little more explanation than description, but there's still description present. So that's what we're wanting for an ideal paragraph. So what I'd like you to do is to, if you have time, if you feel inclined, write your own one, and send that through to me, email it through to me, and that way I can give you some feedback. It'd be good to know what you need to do to improve your paragraphs before you write a graded essay. So there we go, setting in the text, another key aspect done.